The idea of many references in the Bible to a mountain. Mount Sinai is the most famous, but I backed up to the story of Abraham and the story of Isaac, of Abraham taking Isaac, and he has to bring him as an offering, and he's told to bring him on a mountain. The reason we started speaking about mountain climbing is because for many, kosher is the climbing of a mountain. It takes a lot of effort. Now, I asked the question last week as to why Moses would need to climb the mountain. If he has to go and bring his son Isaac as an offering, he can do that offering on flat land as well. What is it about the mountain? And we started explaining, and that's where I'll continue. For one thing, when you talk about climbing a mountain, you're being told that it's not an easy journey. Flat surface comes naturally, but an incline takes more effort, and an incline takes more resolve. You have to want to climb that mountain to get there. For another, a mountaintop also has a connotation of solitude, of being alone, removed and isolated from the rest of society that are in the valley. You're out there on your own. Think about it. When Abraham was asked to do what he was asked to do, he was very much alone. He didn't send out a press release to the press, guess what I'm going to do today? That wouldn't have looked that good. He didn't advertise this great act of piety that God had asked of him. He didn't tell anybody, he didn't tell his wife either. He didn't tell his neighbors. He didn't let anyone know where he was going. If you think about it, who amongst his contemporaries would have applauded him for doing this? No one. Who would admire the depth of his commitment and the power of his sacrifice? No one. They would all say, you're crazy. Who would cheer him on? Nobody. And there he is. He wakes up early in the morning, and he's taking that lonely journey to carry out God's will. And he ends up alone on the top of a mountain. Not in front of cheering people. He's not in the stadium. The people of his generation, as it was, thought there was something wrong with him. His father disowned him, so to say. His father was an idol-worshipping individual. Abraham fought against that. His nephew had distanced himself from him. We have this phrase called Echad Haya Avraham. In literal translation, it means Abraham was one. But what it really means is Abraham was alone. He took on the world. He was his own man. And because of that, humanity and civilization as we know it exists today because of what he brought to the world. Because of his vision, because of his sacrifice, because he had the faith and the courage to meet God alone at the top of a mountain. The story of Abraham is not just a story about an individual. This image of our great-grandfather making that climb up the mountain is not just a story about Abraham and Isaac. It's actually your story. It's the story of each and every single one of us. We each asked at times in our lives to climb a mountain and to meet God alone at the top of that mountain. So when Abraham did what he did 3,700 years ago, it really is a microcosm for what God was going to ask each of us in our own ways, in our own life, in our own story, in our own journey. To step up with courage for your convictions, to be ready to make sacrifices, whether big or small, even when no one out there will applaud you for it. We're so used to doing things for public perception that the public will appreciate what we're doing. But God often asks us to do something that he wants us to do, and it has nothing to do with public approval. To meet God alone at the top of a mountain. You think about it. When it comes to Jewish practice, and you have been brought up with tradition, and you begin to discover that there's more out there. We've been talking the last few weeks here about kosher. For some of you, you're used to it. It's familiar to you. For some of you, You've never had part of a kosher home. You weren't raised in a kosher home. And now you've been hearing class after class that maybe I should start looking for kosher symbols. So maybe the next time you're in the market, or maybe you did this last week, you started, instead of just taking the product off the shelf and putting it in your cart, you started looking at the product. Don't underestimate what that meant to God. Don't think that that was just 15 extra minutes of your time. That was to God looking down saying, wow, thank you. Because you're meeting me on your mountaintop. You're doing something different. You're not on the surface anymore. You're climbing. And you know that perhaps family members, friends are going to say, what are you, crazy? What are you getting into? Why are you doing that? And it doesn't stop you. God asks Abraham to climb his mountain. God asks you to climb your mountain. In other areas of Judaism, when your weekend suddenly takes on more spiritual meaning because you're studying about Shabbat, and you're going to take time off of your Shabbat, and either you're going to have a Friday night dinner, or you're going to go to the synagogue. You're doing things on Saturday different than you did 5 years ago. That's climbing your mountain. And at times, again, you're climbing it alone because the people in your circles of social circles will wonder what's gotten into you. You make time on a Wednesday afternoon at 12:30 instead of doing whatever else you could be doing to come together to study ancient texts that were given at Sinai thousands of years ago. And you do it consistently. Whether you're here in the room, whether you're on Zoom, whether you're on Facebook, whether you're on YouTube. But you find the time because you want to study. Don't underestimate the importance of this hour, the importance of this moment. Don't discount it. To God, this is God asking you, as important as it was when he asked Abraham to climb a mountain, that's your mountain that you're climbing. And God celebrates this sacrifice along with you. In the 41 years that I've had the merit and the honor to serve as the Chabad rabbi here in the Canal Valley, I have seen some pretty amazing things. I have seen people come from what would be considered virtually ground zero in the terms of Judaism and Jewish practice, and start embracing this inner spark of Abraham with such devotion and such commitment. The Talmud tells us that from my teachers I have learned a great deal, but from my students far more. So for someone like me that grew up observing Shabbat or keeping kosher, it's not much of a sacrifice. It's just conditioning. It's just the way I always will. That's the way I was raised. And yet when I see students and they're suddenly embracing it and suddenly taking it on one step at a time, I understand the sacrifice that it takes on their part, the commitment, the courage. That's climbing your mountain. There was a family here in the community in the early days, some 25 years ago, that started taking this journey up the mountain. And they started growing in their Jewish practice and their Jewish observance. At that point, they lived quite a distance from the synagogue, so they started walking. It was like about an hour and a half walk each way to the synagogue. But they really wanted it. They were enjoying the ride, so to say. And then at some point, the 13-year-old boy says he doesn't want to go to public school anymore. He wants to go to a Jewish day school. And his mother embraced the decision. And they took him out of public school and sent him to a Jewish day school. He was loving it, having a great time. This boy's grandfather, not from the area, was not fond of Jewish observance. He was a Jew himself, but not fond of the idea of practicing any of it. And for him, the idea that his grandson was going to a Jewish school was something he couldn't handle. He was very disappointed. He wanted his grandson to have this great secular education and go on to some Ivy League school, and then going to a Jewish school is just not for me. So he informed his family, and by the way, he was a person of great means. He had wealth. He informed his family that he was going to come for a visit, and he told his grandson that he'd like to take him out for a private dinner to a fine restaurant. Naturally, our now new young yeshiva boy explains that he only eats in a kosher restaurant. So Grandpa opted for a Starbucks because he wouldn't want to be caught dead going to a kosher establishment. So they're in Starbucks. And he starts first gently explaining to his grandson that this fad that you have of going to this Jewish school, let's just stop it. It's not for our family. The boy says he's actually enjoying his studies, he's enjoying going to the school, he feels connected to it. Nothing doing. Being a man of means, he chose the universal language that everyone seems to understand. And he tells his grandson that I will give you a gift for this next year of $10,000 a month. A month. Just drop out of the school. That's a fortune of money. And the boy says, not interested. He ups the offer to $15,000 a month. Not interested. He changes the offer and he says, I'm just going to go straight to the... I have put aside $700,000 for you. I will put it in an interest earning account. I will put it in now, transfer it to your name. You won't have access to it until you're 21 years old, which will be 8 years from now. But by then, with the interest, you'll be well over $1 million.
Easily.
You'll be a 21-year-old millionaire. I have the funds for my grandchildren, but it's going to be on the condition. Condition you drop out now. I don't know what I would have done. The boy turned to his grandfather and he said, Grandpa, one day you'll find out that the greatest gift is not one that you can give me or buy me. The greatest gift is the gift that God gave us both. I found this gift, and I hope you find it one day soon. And that was the end of that conversation. This was a 13-year-old boy talking. He wasn't raised with this, but embraced it. He climbed his mountain. I'd never underestimated that story to be as great as the story of Abraham and Isaac. Each one has their own challenge at that moment. And when I heard this story from this boy who told me about his conversation with his grandfather, I thought about God at that moment, watching this Starbucks, seeing a kid say to a grandfather with respect, I hope one day you find this gift too. Wow. Finding God on top of a mountain. We each have this mountain to climb. We each have our challenges to meet. We each have our own individual tests to withstand. I remember hearing about this woman who headed up a major business in New York City. She began going to Torah classes. She began studying about Jewish practice and observance, and over time she started making changes in her life. And she made that call to the rabbi that it's time to kosher my condominium. It's time to kosher it. The rabbi comes over to give her this lesson, as I told you last week that we do often, explain what will have to change in the kitchen, what can be koshered, what can't be koshered. And she's taking it all in, and then he points to a pack of Chiclets gum that was on the counter, and he said, like, a product like that is going to have to go because Chiclets does not have kosher supervision. Doesn't sound like much to you, right? I mean, someone's going to go kosher. It involves a lot more than just Chiclets gum. It's everything in that pantry has to be gone through, right? And she says, what do you mean? Are you telling me I can't have Chiclets gum if I go kosher? He says, yeah, it's one of like a few thousand things you can't have, but yes. She says, then I can't do this. Can't give up that. That's too much of what I eat every single day. I chew it all day. I can't do it. Now, at the end of the story is that the rabbi said there's a lot of good gum products out there. You should try them that all are kosher supervised. I'll find you the gum that you like. She ended up finding them. She ended up going kosher. I tell this story and people think I'm mocking her. And what I'm saying to you is, no, I totally understand her. Because we each have that Chiclets gum that we face. That others may not see the challenge in, but to her it was a real challenge. For to her, this was something I chew every time. You're asking me to change something that I do every day? That's hard. So I always tell everyone, we each have Chiclets gum somewhere in our lives that we're being asked to give up as we make our way more and more into an observant life. I've told stories often about Professor Velvel Green, and this is a story I've told quite a few times. I'll tell it again because it's quite fitting for the subject that we're talking about. I went to yeshiva together with Professor Green's son, David Green. We were ordained together in the yeshiva in Montreal. I got to know his father. I brought his father out to speak here three different occasions. His father was a famous professor of NASA. He worked for NASA for many years. He was quite well known in the Midwest of the United States. He wrote many books, many articles, and then he made Aliyah to Israel later in his life. He lived in Be'er-Sheva, and he passed away a number of years ago. But in his time, in his prime, he lived in Minnesota. He was quite well known. People knew of Professor Velvel Green. Involved in Judaism, but not at all in Jewish observance. Very proud of his Zionistic connections, but when it came to Jewish observance, he wasn't part of that. Rabbi Feller was the Chabad rabbi of Minnesota. Rabbi Feller was making a big dinner, and he wanted to have names of part of his cheer people that people would recognize. Like, if that guy's involved with you guys, you're not that crazy. Right? So you want to look for names that people would associate with, well, if Professor Velvel Green is associated with Chabad, I could as well. So he made a call to Professor Velvel Green, and he wanted to come meet him, and he wanted to introduce him to Chabad and to ask if we can borrow your name and put it down as one of the chair people. Anyway, that began this relationship between Professor Green and Rabbi Feller. At some point, as the relationship developed, he learned about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he started a written correspondence back and forth with the Rebbe, many on subjects of science. Many of them have been published, questions on science, answers on science, and I've told many of those stories as well. I won't get into that story now. But early on in this relationship between the rabbi and the professor, because they were both dynamic and they had this wonderful relationship, on one of the occasions, Professor Green was going to travel. It was going to be a long trip. It had a stopover as well. Rabbi Feller called him to say farewell, that he should have a good trip. And he tells him, listen, when you're up there in God's world and you want a safe trip, what you should do is you should order a kosher meal. In those days, they would serve meals on the airplanes. So you had a choice to order a regular meal or a kosher meal. So he tells Professor Green, call the airlines and order a kosher meal. Professor Green says, but I don't keep kosher. He says, I know you don't keep kosher, but in the plane you should keep kosher. It makes no sense. Why should I keep kosher in the plane then if I don't keep kosher on the ground? Because you want a safe flight, that's number one. Number two, you're in a public place. And it maybe if people see it's Professor Green and he's eating a kosher meal, maybe they'll start saying, well, if Professor Green eats a kosher meal, maybe I should start keeping kosher. It's good. It's just a good thing to do. Stop arguing. Just do it. Will it make you happy? It'll make me happy. Fine, I'll do it. So for the first time in his life, he calls the airline to order a kosher meal. And he gets on his flight, and he's sitting there. And the flight attendant makes their way down. They used to be called stewardesses in the olden days. And they get to Professor Green, and Professor Green puts up his hand. No, I ordered a kosher meal. He has to say it very loud so that everyone hears that he ordered the kosher meal, because that was part of the plan. And what's your name? My name is Professor Velvel Green, that is. Okay, I'll be back soon with your kosher meal. 10 minutes go by and there's no meal coming. 15 minutes go by still. So he rings the bell. Flight attendant comes and says, yes, you were going to bring my kosher meal. Oh, yes, we're going to get right to it. Now, he's a big man. He's a hungry man, and he wants his meal. And then the flight attendant returns and has the look on their face. And I've seen that look. It's a look that tells you you're going to be hungry. It's a look that says something must have gone wrong, but we're very sorry we don't have your kosher meal. Now, his instinct was, so I'll take the Salisbury steak that my neighbor has because I don't really keep kosher. He's hungry. He doesn't keep kosher. There's other food right there. But he realized he already made such a public big deal that he wants his kosher meal. How's it going to look now if Professor Green says it's not that important? So he goes hungry. He's very angry. He's very angry at God. He's angry at the airlines. But he's furious at Rabbi Feller, who convinced me to do this stupid, idiotic idea. The flight is a stopover. It stops in some airline. You still have some shops open late at night, and he sees a hot dog stand. And the hot dogs are the ones that spiral, that go around and around. They really whet your appetite when you see it. And it's got all the relish right nearby, and the sauerkraut and all the stuff you want. And he finally is going to get some food. He loves hot dogs. He's going to go there. And he gets online. He says, no. I'm going to come back to the line soon. First, I have a phone call to make. And he goes to a payphone. Again, when I told the story today, most people in the audience have no idea what I'm talking about. There used to be something called a pay phone. This audience might remember, right? Okay. Now, if you're going to make a long distance phone call, it could be like $9.75 in quarters, which you didn't carry in your pocket. So what did you do if you needed to make a long distance call using a pay phone? You called collect. Remember that? Collect calls? Collect means that the person on the other end will accept the charges. In collect calls, there were two types of collect calls. You can make a general collect call, or you can make a person-to-person collect call. Anyone remember those? Person-to-person collect calls means you're only asking for one specific person. If that person's not home, you're not making this call. But that's a very expensive phone call to make. It's about 11:30 p.m. He calls the feller home, a person-to-person collect call for Rabbi Moshe Feller. It wakes up his wife. His wife picks up. I have a person-to-person collect call from Professor Velvel Green for Rabbi Moshe Feller. Would you accept the charges? She says, I got to wake up my husband. This must be an emergency. Who knows what happened? She wakes up Moshe, Professor Green is on the phone. It's a person-to-person collect call. Should we accept the charges? Of course, accept the charges. It must be an emergency. He gets on the phone. What happened? What happened? I'll tell you what happened. I'll tell you exactly what happened. I listened to your idiotic idea. You told me it was going to make you happy, so I did it. And I ordered that kosher meal. They never had my kosher meal on the flight. And I'm hungry. I'm very hungry. But I'm more angry at you than I am hungry. So I wanted to let you know that right near this phone, there's a hot dog stand. It's selling non-kosher hot dogs. I'm getting on that line. I'm buying me two non-kosher hot dogs. And with every bite I eat, I will think of you. But before I do that, I wanted to wake you up to tell you that's what I'm going to do. That was the relationship in general between these two characters. So Rabbi Feller, who you would have said, I'm so sorry it happened, didn't take that approach with Professor Green. Instead, he said, before you hang up, in every one of our conversations, or should I call them debates and arguments, because they argued a lot, you would always challenge me with this question. Summarize Judaism on a bumper sticker. Can you summarize all of Judaism in short? One phrase. And everything I would answer, you would say, unacceptable, unacceptable. You never liked any of my answers. Right now, on the phone, I'm going to summarize all of Judaism in one sentence. All of Judaism is, can you hang up the phone, get onto your connecting flight without buying the hot dog? Good night, Professor. And he hangs up the phone. This guy's crazy. All of Judaism is if I get on the next plane. You're nuts. He gets right online. He's going to get his hot dog. And as he told the story right here in Agora Hills, he says, and at some point, before I handed over the money to buy the hot dog, I got it. All of Judaism is God having a relationship with each and every single one of us personally, and we each have our challenges. We each have our mountains to climb. And here was my mountain, right there in this airport. I never bought the hot dog. I never ate another piece of non-kosher for the rest of my life. Wow. It was that moment that suddenly I realized I was climbing a mountain. We each have these moments where that's the challenge, that's the time. What can we do? It's true in all aspects of life. It's not just when it comes to the ritual, and not just when it comes to the spiritual. We each have our own hurdles. And sometimes it really feels like an uphill battle. Like we're walking up the steps of an escalator, but the escalator is not going up. The escalator is going down, and we're trying to walk it up. That's what struggle feels like. It's like every time you take one step up, how come I'm moving down again? There are setbacks. There are disappointments. Not every time that we try to do something good and right do we succeed. Sometimes the initial attempt doesn't work. And we fall, and we fail, and we falter. And sometimes it hurts, and we cry. Those that go mountain climbing or rock climbing will tell you that not every step results in going higher. Sometimes you slip, and you go down a notch. Sometimes you realize that you have to go down in order to go around. But every minor setback is part of the process. Because life isn't a straight line. We want it to be this well-paved road, but it never is. There are always rocks to climb. There are hurdles to overcome. Judaism's view of a righteous person is not necessarily one that doesn't falter. A righteous person is one who falls and falls again and again, but gets up each time and continues the climb. So whether your particular mountain could be in the arena of career, business-related matters, relationships, marriage, parents, children, friends, we each have hurdles in the area of relationships, difficulties, or any area of life. Instead of allowing setbacks to send us hurling down the mountain, we have to use it as a springboard to gain strength, to climb even stronger. There's a strange biblical story in the book of Genesis about Jacob. Jacob is returning to his homeland after being away for many years. He's alone at night, and this mysterious stranger comes out of nowhere and attacks him. And they wrestle. And they have a wrestling match that goes on through the darkness of the night. But Jacob wouldn't surrender. Jacob knew he needed the courage to defend himself, and he fights this brave and valiant fight. When the assailant sees that he can't overpower Jacob, he strikes Jacob on the hip, and he dislocates his hip. And despite the pain, Jacob won't surrender. He won't let go. The attacker gets desperate and appeals to Jacob, "Let me go. Let go of the hold that you have on me." Jacob understood that this was no ordinary opponent, but rather this was a heavenly emissary. This was Esau, his twin brothers, an angel that was watching over Esav now coming to fight his brother's battles and fighting in a physical manner with Jacob. And he understood that he can't surrender. It was the guardian angel of Esav. So Jacob says to him, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And the angel says, your name will no longer be called Yaakov, it will no longer be called Jacob, but your name will be Israel. That's where we get the name Israel till this very day from that story of this wrestling match with the angel. Why Yisrael? Why Israel? Why does the angel say Yisrael? Ki sarisa im Elokim v'im anoshim v'tuchal. It comes from the word to struggle with the divine. Yisrael has the word of struggling, fighting, battling in it. Who are we? Yisrael, we are those who wrestle with the divine. But we stay in the match. What does it mean to be a Jew? It means that even when you're alone, and even when there's a struggle, and even when you're struggling with your faith, you're struggling with the divine, you still hang in there, you persevere, and you do the right thing. You turn the suffering into a blessing. That's been the story of Jewish history. We get up on our feet and we climb the mountain. Back in the 1960s, there was a young Jewish man who was living in Mexico at the time. His name was Solomon Mizrahi. Solomon struggled desperately to make a living to support his family. The business that he was in was importing coffee, which he would sell in and around Mexico. It was a very competitive business, and he kept on hitting brick walls. Every time he thought he'd made it, he would fall back again. And it was a struggle. One day, Solomon negotiated a deal with a Japanese coffee supplier to buy a huge amount of coffee at an incredible low price. It was a long-term contract, and it was a great deal for Solomon Mizrahi. This was it, he said. This is the break he's been waiting for. Finally, a big deal that went his way. He's been waiting for years to be able to come home and tell his wife, I've made a deal that's going to take us out of poverty. The profit margin was going to be huge, enough that he could put a down payment on a house. You can get the kids new clothes. That night, he showed the contract to his wife and he said, look, our days of poverty are over. This is it. This is the moment we've been waiting for. The next day he goes to the office. The Japanese supplier is waiting for him. He looks very somber. And he says, Mr. Mizrahi, the price that I quoted you was way too low. It was a mistake. But I did sign the contract. And if you hold me to the contract, my company that I represent will honor it because it's my signature. But I will lose my job because I will cost them thousands, tens of thousands of dollars over an error that I made. But a contract is a contract, and my signature is a signature, but I leave it to you to decide what you would like to do. Without blinking an eye, Solomon Mizrahi took the contract in his hands and he ripped it up. He said, I won't make my money of someone's error and cause pain and hardship in your life just because I'm struggling. Didn't debate it. Didn't think it through. And had to come home and tell his wife and kids that the party of last night was a little premature because that contract is not a contract. Now, imagine yourself in that position. Contract is a contract. He's saying it himself. The company's going to have to honor it. I've been waiting. I've been paying my dues for years for a moment like this. But for him, there was no decision to be made. And just like that, the dream was over. And Solomon Mizrahi continued to struggle, trying to generate whatever business he could. No big windfall opportunities came along, but he never looked back with regret. Fast forward. It's 10 years later. That same Japanese man left the coffee business and became an executive for a big electronics company in Japan. The company, which developed cutting-edge technology in televisions, decided that they wanted to market their televisions in Mexico. But they were looking for someone to head up the department, to have the exclusive rights to distribute this new product in Mexico. And without missing a beat, our Japanese friend said, I know a businessman in Mexico who is the most honest human being on the face of the earth. And Solomon Mizrahi was offered a job. He was granted the exclusive rights. Any retail store in Mexico that wanted to sell these television sets can only buy it through Solomon Mizrahi. It was a gold mine, far more lucrative than the coffee deal would have ever been. And from there, his reputation grew. And he went on to become the exclusive distributor for companies such as Yamaha pianos, Citizen watches, and all other companies turned to Solomon Mizrahi to be the sole distributor of their products in all of Mexico. He became a very wealthy man and a very philanthropic man. He supported many Jewish organizations and worthy causes all over the world. But at that very one moment, when a Japanese salesman told him his story, he faced his mountain. And he faced it alone. He climbed his mountain at that particular moment of time. Now, sometimes we think to ourselves, when we're faced with these things, does it really matter? No one notices, no one knows the difference anyway. Whether I am charitable, I'm not charitable, whether I am kind, I'm not kind. You know, we go out of our way to be honest and ethical in business dealings. But does anyone even know? And the answer is that God knows. That's the fact. We don't live our lives for others. We live it because these challenges are put to us by God Almighty. His video cameras are pretty good. He knows everything that you do, all the good that you do that no one even knows about, the kindness that you share with others that no one recognizes and no one knows. We do it for Him. There's also other people that kind of know. They pick up. And those are our children and our grandchildren. They recognize things. They see things. I saw this great article. It read like this: when you thought I wasn't looking, talking about a child writing this about their parents. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you hang my first painting on the refrigerator, and I immediately wanted to paint another one. We always did that. We took these kindergarten pictures that looked like Mishke Bibble, as we called it, but we hung it up. Now, we hung it up, we wanted to show others that we're proud of our kid, but we never realized the effect it had on our kid themselves. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you feed a stray cat, and I learned that it was good to be kind to animals. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you make my favorite cake for me, and I learned that little changes can be very special in life. When you thought I wasn't looking, I heard you say a prayer, and I knew there was a God I can always talk to, and I learned to trust in God. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you make a meal and take it to a friend who was sick, and I learned that we all need to help take care of each other. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you give your time and money to help people who had nothing, and I learned that those who have something should give to those who don't. When you thought I wasn't looking, I felt you kiss me goodnight, and I felt loved and safe. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw tears come from your eyes, and I learned that sometimes things hurt, but that it's okay to cry. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw how you handled your responsibilities even when you didn't feel good. And I learned that I would need to be responsible when I grow up. And when you thought I wasn't looking, I looked at you and I wanted to say, thank you for all the things I saw when you thought I wasn't looking. So powerful, so meaningful. Because our kids do see the things. They see the mountains we climb. They see the struggles we go through. And they watch how we respond to these struggles and how we get around the hurdles and how we continue to climb. And so When we talk on subjects such as kosher, and there's challenges that come along, and there's thinking that you start digesting during the week, should I or shouldn't you? Know that these moments are not taken lightly, and they're private moments between you and God, and they're mountains that God puts before you to climb.